Right now on WCNC Plus, test results of the soil near a Mooresville daycare confirm what experts feared, what they call unacceptably risky levels of carcinogens and radioactivity in the coal ash placed there decades ago as fill dirt. The findings follow a months-long WCNC Charlotte investigation that revealed the coal burning byproduct and its toxic ingredients aren't just buried near Tutor Time of Mooresville. The coal ash is buried under the daycare, too. Thanks for joining us here. I'm Jane Monreal, today with Nate Morabito. Nate, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you have spent the last 4 months looking into this one daycare and the soil under and around it. Let's start from the beginning. How did you find out about this?
So for a while, we and other people have reported about concerns about coal ash, which is basically a byproduct of the coal burning process that includes toxic ingredients. And many years ago, it was used as what's called structural fill. Basically, construction crews could buy it and put it in the ground and then build on top of it. And we also knew that there had been a sinkhole that opened up in Mooresville near a facility up there where coal ash had been exposed. And I started getting interest from that. I received a tip that I should look into that, but I'd also heard that national outlets were looking into that specific issue there. But through that reporting process, I found out about this daycare. And my job really is to not do what everybody else is doing when it comes to reporting. It's to find unique problems and come up with solutions. And when I found out there was a daycare with coal ash under it and potentially exposed coal ash in some spots and kids, vulnerable children, I immediately locked in and said, this is something we have to report on.
Yep.
These kids' health, it's at stake, and no one else is covering this issue. So we, as a station, WCNC Charlotte, committed to properly telling the story. And a big part of that was collecting soil samples. And there's a public median that's not too far from the daycare that we collected some coal ash samples from right beneath the ground. This is supposed to be buried pretty deep underneath the ground. This was right there, right near the surface. And we collected them, and Duke University agreed to test those samples.
Wow. Talk more about Duke University's findings, but you talked to a woman, Angela Hine, about also digging deeper, figuratively and literally, about this coal ash and where it all came from. Talk to us about that.
I mean, so this is really important here. The rules that are in place require the coal ash be beneath the ground at a certain level. And the idea is that should limit the exposure to people if it's buried about 1.5 feet beneath. A foot plus an additional half foot layer. And essentially the idea is that it's covered up enough so that the dust from coal ash maybe cannot get to the surface. But we found this coal ash and the median right near the surface. That's a problem. We also found what looked like exposed coal ash near the fence line of the daycare, a major problem.
Wow.
Because then you have dust, you have kids playing nearby, and this is chronic exposure we're worried about. Kids every day potentially being exposed to this. And so the real question now is, we know it's under and around the daycare, the coal ash, 100,000 tons in this business park. The question is, how deep is the coal ash? And pictures over the years suggest it's been at the surface multiple times. Take a listen to that big question.
When we look at sites that have used coal ash fill, that's the first thing we want to know. How deep is the coal ash buried? Because when we talk to our radiation experts, what they say is, you know, one of the most dangerous components of coal ash is radionuclides, because it exposes us to radiation if we're close to it. We need to have coal ash buried, if we're using it as fill, we need to have it buried at least 1 foot deep, preferably 2 feet. And the reason I say 1 foot is because, you know, if children play or dig, or let's say they want to dig a hole on the playground and come across coal ash, that wouldn't be something you would want your children to be exposed to. So 2 feet is even safer, diminishes greatly the likelihood of any exposure to coal ash that would cause health injury.
All right, so you talked about that it is found close to the surface, nowhere near the 2 feet ideal level. And you took these samples to Duke University again. So what was their findings?
Let's start with the radium, because radium is radioactive. We just got those samples back. And the radioactivity from the samples of that public median is more than 4 times higher than the normal levels in soil. Okay? And we're looking at its highest point, triggering what should be and what normally would be the Environmental Protection Agency to start cleaning up a site. That's kind of the cleanup standard right there for the radium. Radium is a carcinogen, all right? There's also arsenic, another known carcinogen. And in that case, it's very high, above the natural soil level as well, 69 times higher than the state, North Carolina's own soil remediation goals. And there's also, by the way, 4 dozen other elements that are in this coal ash that we brought to the scientist. And he said, Dr. Avner Vengash is his name, you're gonna hear from him in a second, but he goes, this really isn't about 1 or 2 elements. This is a cocktail of toxic elements. And we're talking about that combination. We don't know what the impact could be on kids, but it could be even more significant because it's a combination. Let's take a listen.
We have knowledge first about those toxicity and the impact of the individual elements in coal ash on human health. Second, we have some experience from the past. Following the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, coal ash spill in 2009, the workers who worked to take out the coal ash from the river were exposed for a couple of years of coal ash. And now we see the population of those workers having high occurrence of lung cancer, blood cancer, different type of cancer that directly, apparently, associate with the exposure to coal ash. Now, having children, which is even more vulnerable population, and having chronically exposed to dust and even direct into the mouth, touching soil containing coal ash, could be really problematic for the health of those children.
I would imagine parents are not really responding to this well.
Well, the parents haven't heard the results. They're just now finding this out.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
They knew there was coal ash because of us and because really of a local woman who's been trying to raise awareness about this for several years. Mostly people have not listened to her. She was right. There was coal ash under and around that property. But what was especially concerning from the beginning is that these parents tell me the daycare never told them it was built on top of coal ash that could be potentially toxic. And one mother told me she is just kind of waiting carefully for the test results to come in to make a decision about what's best for her kid, because you can try and move your child somewhere else, but daycares are often full. It's hard to get daycares. Do you take a chance? And Dr. Vengash told me this is not something that just shows up after one exposure. This is 5 to 7 years down the road. Some illnesses and cancers may not show up for. So it's not really about the impact today, it's about the impact tomorrow.
And so how's the daycare responding?
So the daycare has actually taken quite a bit of action, and they're mostly saying all the right things about how they're going to handle this situation. Number one, we pointed out the exposed coal ash near the fence line. They quickly hired crews to cover it up to make sure it has enough ground above it. They're also moving forward with their own samples. We don't know what they're testing for. Are they testing for arsenic and radium? I don't have that answer. But we know that they've sampled more than 30 different spots in the property there, and they're waiting for the results, which could take 6 to 8 weeks, but they say they will let a toxicologist review the results, and they'll keep parents updated as well. They say the safety and the health of those kids and their employees is very important. And they also kind of point out a recent visit by state regulators, a visual inspection. Let's be real clear about that. They looked around. That said, Tutor Time says, found no risk to children, right? But these test results, based on the scientists that we talked to, and there are several of them, to them and the experts show that this is a legit concern.
All right. And have you talked to Duke Energy?
I've been in communication with Duke Energy a lot about this situation. For many years, Duke has downplayed the risks associated with this, repeatedly telling us coal ash is not toxic. But upon sharing our most recent results, the idea and the thought from Duke is that at this particular site, this is the property owner's responsibility to maintain it. Duke's relationship and connection ended many years ago. Let's remind people that Duke Energy sold the coal ash from its plant to construction workers into different places. So it originated at Duke Energy, but once they sold it based on the regulations of the time, they say that were meant to be used to keep people safe and the environment safe. Their relationship with that ended many years ago. And I asked, well, what about your corporate responsibility to this community? And kind of Duke came back to those main talking points.
Okay. You said that the state inspectors came in for a visual inspection. Anything else expected from them as far as a response?
Well, I've asked very specifically from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, what guidance are you giving the daycare? They have not shared that information with us. I suspect behind the scenes there is a lot happening, but not much of it is being shared publicly. We've shared our results with the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, with the town of Mooresville. Of course, we've shared it with Tutor Time as well. And the idea, at least from Dr. Van Gosh and other experts we talked to, is that they're going to need to do something immediately there. It could be covering up all the coal ash. It could be removing the coal ash. And the daycare says they're prepared to do whatever it takes, depending what their results show. And that's going to be the real critical thing here. We know what our samples show. Our samples are from a median. It's not from the daycare. We know how shallow those samples came from. We know what's in those samples. We don't know how deep the coal ash is in that daycare. And that is the question that we need to answer.
So as we all wait for that, what is the current situation as far as pushing for any action? Do we just sit around and wait?
No, there are many people, both publicly and privately, pushing for action in this case. And we continue to push this issue because we think multiple agencies need to be held accountable for the responsibility they owe to the public here and to those kids. And even when we asked DEQ for an interview, they declined it. They said, you need to talk to the Department of Health and Human Services. We did. They declined an interview, pointed us back to DEQ. Duke pointed us back to DEQ. So there's a lot of like this, and this going on. But the Department of Health and Human Services concedes. I mean, after a lot of exposure, coal ash what's in coal ash can cause some serious health effects to people, including cancers.
All right. Quite the process in nailing down where it's coming from and the next steps moving forward.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, this has been one of the most difficult stories I've ever reported on. It's very complex, and it's a life or death situation. When you talk to the people who really care deeply about this, they are worried. They are legitimately worried about those children who go to school there, and who used to go to school there many years ago, and who will go there in the future.
All right. Nate, thank you very much for shedding some more light and continuing to stay on top of this process. And we thank you for watching. A reminder, you can find Nate's complete coverage so far right now inside the WCNC Charlotte mobile app. Just scan the QR code on your screen.